Okay, so continuing on with the second part of the lecture, we're going to look at the foundations of social science. And I suppose just to say the foundations of social science is we're going to look at where did social science begin. Okay, so we know that there was the natural sciences, and when we're talking about the natural sciences, we're talking about looking at animals and looking at plants, and we think about, often when we think about science and we hear the word science, especially when we were younger, you would have thought of maybe people in white coats and doing experiments and doing different tests. Well, I suppose that's the original concept of science. So what happened was people came along in the mid to late 19th century and started talking about, well, what about social sciences, okay? So today we're going to look at social sciences. And I want to say, I suppose the point of going back and looking at foundations of the social sciences and the beginnings of social sciences and where did sociology come from is just to give you a little bit of a grounding in social science and in sociology before we move on to look at the different perspectives. In order for you to look at and be able to analyse youth work through different sociological frameworks, such as the ones that we've talked about, the radicalist humanist paradigm, conflict theory, functionalist theory, we need to just sort of have an idea, need to ground ourselves in some of the foundations of where these came from, because it'll give you a clear idea as to where these theories, these lenses that you're going to use within your own research and your own writing came from, and hopefully it'll support you to be able to understand them a bit better. So the philosophy of the social sciences is the study of logic and methods of the social sciences. So, as I said, there was the natural sciences. There still is the natural sciences, and this is looking at okay, so how do we look at plants? How do we look at animals? How do we test things? How do we look at these objects? We're not animals. We're not plants. How do we start to look at and test these different objects? So we're outside, so we're coming to them to try and figure out what they're about. So people started talking about society and humans, which they were as well, and saying, well, can we start looking at humans, and can we start looking at society, and could we start trying to figure out what society is about? Would this make sense? Does it make sense? So is there a logic to it? And then how do we start doing it? Do we start taking test tubes to people, or, so this debate began in the early to mid 1800s. So the philosophy of social science looked also to produce a rational reconstruction of social science, okay? How do we do this? And also critique social science with the aim of enhancing their ability to explain the world. So this is the world around us. We're part of it. We're all humans in this world. How do we start understanding humans? How do we start understanding individuals? How do we start understanding groups? And also how we construct this within our society. So there's a lot we need to know, that we want to know. And how do we start putting this together as a school of thought, as a way of learning? Is this possible, and should we do this? Okay, sorry about that. So the natural sciences, as I said, were already established. Okay, so this was the starting point. So here's natural science. This is how we do science with things that are around us in the world. Okay, so this is how we do science with animals. This is how we do science with elements, with plants, with different things like that. So that was already there. So how do we look at that and maybe draw from it, or find influences from it, or just use it as a base to start thinking how we can or we can't look at humans and look at human behavior? Okay, so as I said, the great debate, as it was known around the philosophy of social sciences, was really coming to the fore between mid to late 19th century, so the 1800s. names which you may have heard of as well, as I'm aware, such as Auguste Comte and Karl Popper came to the fore. Okay, so they had different perspectives. They had perspectives from, again, what's the point? Why are we doing this in the first place? And then, how do we do this? Okay, so they were coming from different ontological and epistemological perspectives, and they were looking at different things, such as, a positivist perspective, a constructivist perspective, an objective perspective, and an objective perspective. So, which we look at in a little bit more detail as we go on. So, but they different ideas. The views were divided on whether the study of society could be viewed. So, can we do this and carried out in the same way the study of the natural sciences is done? Okay, so do we approach humans to do tests on them? How can we do tests on them? How can we study them? How can we research them? And if we don't do it in the same way that we do with the natural sciences, what other ways are there? And like for example, one of the questions was, well, when we're studying in the natural sciences, when we're doing research, we're not plants, we're not animals, so we're automatically objective, that we're automatically standing outside, that we're not part of it, so we're objective. Whereas when you're talking about humans and you're talking about society, that brings in a different element, because we are humans, we are part of society, we are within it. Can we stand back outside it? Some say we could, some say we couldn't. So this is part of the debate. This is part of the debates and the critiques that were happening at the time. So some of the questions, and these are some of the questions that I have been posing as I've been talking over the past couple of slides. So some of the questions, and hopefully this will make it a little bit clearer. So some of the questions that people like Popper and Comte were asking were the following. So what is the method or methods of social science? So like I said, how do we do this? What are the sort of methods that we're going to use in order to study society? Does social science use the same methods as natural science? And I've gone through that a little bit already. So do we do it in the same way? A lot of the time when we see methods being used within natural sciences, it's, they're doing tests, they're using numbers, they're using statistics, it's very quantitative. Can we do the same? Do we do the same with people? If not, should we aspire to? So should we be doing that? Okay. And again, some people said we should be replicating to a large extent how natural sciences did their science, and other people were saying no. And then often it was dependent on what context of society you were talking about and what you wanted to find out. Okay, but we'll talk about that as we go on. Or are there methods appropriate to social inquiry that are fundamentally different from those of natural science? Okay, so are there ways of doing social inquiry? Are there ways which many of you will know, you've done at least undergrad research, that there are different ways of doing social inquiry? So, for example, again, would you do an interview with a plant? No, you wouldn't. So, when you're talking about how we find out about humans, we talk to them, don't we? So that's qualitative research. So that's, interviewing, using interviews to try and gather information to inquire into society and inquire into humans. So, is scientific investigation of the social world even possible or desirable? Well, this was what the debate was about. What type of knowledge does social inquiry produce? So again, when we're talking about doing inquiry in the natural sciences, we're aware that, like I said, maybe numbers, statistics, different knowledge like that might be produced. Well, what's the sort of knowledge that would be produced from doing inquiry with humans and with society? That was a massive question. Can the social sciences be objective and value neutral? And that's what I just talked about there a couple of minutes ago. So we're part of it. We're within society. So if we're doing research, and we're looking into society and what are humans about, can we be objective? Can we stand outside when we're part of it? And also, when we're doing research and when we're looking at society, can we be value neutral? Can we look at it and forget where we're coming from, try and put that aside in order to find out about others? Do we bring our own values and our own biases to the research? And I suppose later on, which you look at in more depth when you're doing your own research, you look at this, this will come up obviously when you're talking about ethics and how can we be ethical while also bringing our own values and our own biases to a piece of research. Should we strive to be? So is it something we should do? Should we try to be value neutral, or should we acknowledge that we do come with values and just be able to manage that? Does the social world represent a unique realm of inquiry with its own properties and laws? Okay, so the natural sciences have their own properties and laws, they have their own rules, and that's how we build research around that. Is the social world the same? Is there particular ways that we understand the social world and why and how it works? Okay, so to be cognizant of that. Or can the regularities and other properties of the social world be reduced to facts about individuals? Okay, so can we look at the social world and say, this is it's basically saying, I suppose, that can we say that, oh well, this person is like this person is like this, or can we say that, oh well, all people are like this, and that we generalize? So how do we handle the information that we get? How do we look at it? How do we view it? Okay, so I just want to introduce these last two concepts, okay, just for this part of the lecture. So within the philosophy of social sciences, there are two ways of conceptualizing social reality. So before we move on to paradigms, before we move on to the debates around the social science, I just want to highlight these two concepts, and these two are your starting point. Everyone does this. You mightn't use a concept, you mightn't use these two concepts, but everyone does this, and they're particular to the social sciences, okay? And you do this as a youth worker, as a sociologist, as being part of this world. You start from these two stances, which is ontology and epistemology. And then within ontology and epistemology, which we'll look at next time, are the four stances, I suppose, that I mentioned already: the interpretive, the positivistic, the constructionist, and the objective. So they're the four stances within ontology and epistemology, and I hope that the readings that I've given you will help you look at these. Okay, so ontology is essentially what we know in the world, what exists, what is our social reality. So what do we define as social reality? Okay, so what do we see as social reality? So a nod to the Greeks here. So this originally the word ontology came from the Greek meaning on being, okay, and then theory, so logos, theory, okay, so being and theory. Okay, so what is there? What do we know exists? So, as Delante and Stridham define, the theory of the nature of what is, or the theory of the nature of reality. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So what do we see as reality? Okay, so when you're starting research, you're thinking about these different lenses and these different ways of looking at society. Where's our starting point? What do we see as reality? Because people have different ideas about what that looks like. Epistemology then is how we know what we know. In what way do we find it out? So this is about the knowledge gathering. So how do we find out knowledge? How do we gather knowledge? Okay, and this is going to come to the fore more so when we're applying it to youth work. Okay, so how do we view what's the reality in youth work? What do we see as youth work? And then how do we gather? How do we know what we know? Why do we know what we know? How do we learn that? Okay, so what is the meaning of the knowledge we know? Again, this is sounding very philosophical, okay, so just bear with me. So what's the meaning of knowledge? And just to finally define this, Crick says, epistemology focuses on the knowledge gathering process and is concerned with developing new models or theories that are better than competing models and theories. So this is just a bit of food for thought. So have a think about this. Read the readings that I've given you, the articles that I've given you, and then we'll come back to this in the next lecture. Thanks very much.